The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was released in 2014, and just like the last film, it's directed by Marc Webb. Again, for those who don't know what I'm doing, I am reviewing all 5 Spider-Man movies leading up to Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming in 2017. And so for preparation of those movies, I'm reviewing all 5 Spider-Man movies. This is my 5th review. I've already reviewed the Sam Raimi trilogy as well as The Amazing Spider-Man, so if you haven't seen my reviews, all those videos are on my channel right now. Overall, I really enjoyed the first one. I loved the second one, was disappointed with the third one, and I honestly thought that the first one was a very good movie. My opinions on The Amazing Spider-Man kept on changing, but when I watched it for the sake of the review, I honestly really enjoyed The Amazing Spider-Man. It has a lot of problems, but I still really liked it. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has been critically hated. A lot of people absolutely despise The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So much so that it's been on several lists of the worst movie of 2014. But personally, this is the first Spider-Man movie I ever saw in cinemas, and I had a blast with this movie. I got it on DVD the second I saw that it was out. I was just out shopping one day, and then suddenly I realized that this movie was sitting on the shelf, and I realized, oh my gosh, the movie's finally out! Boom, you're coming with me. That is the honest truth. I loved The Amazing Spider-Man 2 when it came out. And that is the honest truth. When The Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out, I loved it. But again, everyone else seems to be hating this movie. So is The Amazing Spider-Man 2 really that bad? So do I still really love this movie? Or has my opinion changed and so now it's just as bad as everyone else says it is? Watching this movie again, I was very surprised to know that I have a lot to say about this movie. And I have so much to say about this movie that I'm going to let you know in advance that this is going to be a pretty long review. Hopefully not too long, but I have a lot to say about this movie. So let's get in and see if we can get all these notes down as quickly as we can. So The Amazing Spider-Man 2 takes place about 2 years after the first movie, and this movie we sort of get to find out more as to what happened with Peter Parker's parents, and relationship between him and Gwen Stacy are continuing to flow, and some other villains starting to arise. A geeky man turns into this electricity villain known as Electro, and while all this is going on, Harry Osborn has eventually come home from the military overseas, and so he wants to continue his friendship with Harry. So there are lots of different subplots going on. Now before I go any further into this review, I'm going to flat out state that this review will be full of spoilers, so if you haven't seen The Amazing Spider-Man 2, stop this video, go and check it out, and then you can come back here and see what you think. Now first I'm going to state the obvious thing right out of the way. Now, I'm not against Sony. I'm not. In fact, I support it. One of my favorite consoles is the PlayStation 2. The headset I use while editing and pretty much everything around my PC, the headset I use is a Sony headset. I use a Sony software. I use Sony Vegas for my video editing. And even the camera that is looking out at me right now, you're seeing this video through a Sony camera. I'm using a black Sony Handycam. Sony's Blu-ray is a genius of an invention, but even I agree that there is a ridiculous amount of product placement in this movie. There are lots of PCs in this movie, lots of phones, lots of technology used, and pretty much all of them are Sony products. I think a lot of people are making fun of the fact mainly because Sony's behind this movie. Sony's making this movie and they're just throwing a lot of their products into the movie, and it's pretty funny. In fact, these days there's so much product placement in pretty much every single Sony movie that it's basically become a Sony version of subliminal Mickeys. You know how in places like Disney World, Disneyland, and Disney movies, there's those subliminal Mickeys, where those tiny hidden Mickeys in Disney things? Well, Sony products has basically become Sony's version of that, where you go into the movie and you just have to keep an eye out to see how many Sony products you can find in Sony's movies. That's all I'm going to say about the subject though, because I have way too much to say in this review. Now one thing I'm going to say is that a lot of people complain that there's way too many subplots in this movie, and I agree with movies like Spider-Man 3. However, one advantage to having so many subplots in this movie is that since there's so much going on in the story, it's impossible to get bored by this film. There was actually supposed to be more stuff in this movie, and one thing that I'm rather disappointed didn't make it into the final cut of the film is the character Mary Jane, just simply because she was going to be played by Shailene Woodley. I honestly like Shailene Woodley as an actor because I think she did a great job in the Divergent movies. Well, the first two, I haven't seen Allegiant yet, but as far as movies like Divergent, I think Shailene Woodley did a great job playing as Tris Pryor. So it would have been great to see Tris Pryor / Shailene Woodley take on the role of Mary Jane Watson, and it's one of the few reasons why I'm really disappointed that Amazing Spider-Man 3 was cancelled, because I really would have loved to see her tackle this role. I could even see Shailene be better than Kirsten Dunst as MJ, but Marc Webb had to take her out of the film just simply because there was so much in it already. Another thing a lot of people complain about is that there's a lot of plot conveniences. There's a whole Peter Parker finds the train in the subway hideout thing just because he accidentally finds the coins in the calculator that he smashed accidentally. Yeah, I agree that there are plot conveniences, but I don't find them that annoying just simply because I still get invested in the story. One thing I love about this movie that I feel like isn't that explored upon in any of the other movies is this movie's theme, and how this movie has a great theme about time and running out of time and how time is limited. And I feel like there's some great things to symbolize, like the fact that the first shot of the movie is a camera going back through the gears of a watch, or the fact that the climax takes place at a clock tower. And there are lots of speeches about the fact that life will eventually end. And every single character in this movie, in one way or another, is running out of time. And I feel like that this is a great theme for the movie. I enjoyed Andrew Garfield's performance in the first movie, and he's even better in this movie. Because when he is playing as Spider-Man, especially like in the first action scene of the movie, he looks like he's having a blast in the role. And apparently the reason for that is because Andrew Garfield is a huge Spider-Man fan. In fact, when he first wore the suit from The Amazing Spider-Man, apparently he even admitted shedding a couple of tears. And so it looks like he's having a blast in the role. He looks like he's having so much fun in the suit. I'm happy for him, and as Spider-Man, he's very funny, very entertaining, and very likable. This movie overall is even funnier than the original. A lot of people say that Spider-Man jokes too often in this movie, and how he's starting to get people killed. But one video I saw that I feel like is a great point to establish is the fact that he's never really using it for nothingness, but he actually uses it as a defense mechanism. As long as the terrorist is driving the truck in the beginning of the film, there's no way he's going to stop cars from crashing. And so to prevent as many cars from crashing as possible, he's making all of those jokes and annoying the Rhino, so eventually he would just shoot at him. And he eventually dodges out and goes to the roof to get him to shoot up the ceiling so he doesn't accidentally shoot anyone. Doing all that joke and dodging and everything will eventually cause him to run out of bullets. So when he's busy reloading, he then jumps back onto the window to steer the truck out of danger. And also he's outside the truck, so he has no control over which pedals are being pushed. It's not Spider-Man's fault that the truck is still accelerating into the cars. So all those cars flipping over and everything and all those people getting killed, none of that is actually his fault. That's him trying to prevent it. So he's basically trying to steer the truck out of harm, which is hard to do because it's New York. Also, there's only a couple scenes in the movie where he's trying to be ridiculously funny. Throughout the movie, he knows when to shut up and take things seriously. Stuff like when Gwen Stacy is falling from the clock tower and dying. Or when he's talking about whether or not he should give Harry his blood. Or the scene where he's trying to calm Electro down in town square. Where is the joking in these scenes? There is not. There's only like 2 scenes I can think of at the top of my head where he's making jokes. And that is Spider-Man's first scene. And one joke he makes in the climax when Electro's going, "I'll be like a god." A god named Sparkles? So no, I don't think it's overdone. There's a lot of complaints about Peter and Gwen Stacy in this movie and how like Peter's just going back and forth. Be with her, don't be with her, be with her, don't be with her and all this stuff. And I honestly don't mind because it feels very natural for this kind of situation. And knowing what Peter said to Captain Stacy at the end of the first movie, it kind of feels natural that he'd be going back and forth like that. Also, I just love Gwen Stacy's moment where she gets annoyed at Spider-Man because he webs her hand to the car so she can't follow Spidey to the danger zone. And so she's just out of frustration, she screams out his name. Unfortunately, he accidentally screams out his real name. Peter! She instantly realizes what she said and then quickly covers her mouth. I don't know if that was scripted or if Emma Stone just said Peter by a complete accident and then covered her mouth unscripted, but whatever that is, that was perfect. That was hilarious. And I honestly think that Gwen Stacy's death in this movie is probably the most tragic death I've ever seen in a Spider-Man movie. Quite possibly any movie ever. And the reason why is because, for starters, they share great chemistry between each other, and you really do like by their relationship, and you really get involved and sucked into it. And a lot of people think that Gwen Stacy is the best thing to come out of the original Amazing Spider-Man and this movie. I don't think that she's the best thing about these movies, but she's definitely better than Mary Jane from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. Not only that, but it's the amount of effort, like the fact that Peter says, "No, you're not coming with me," and then actively webs her hand to a car so she can't follow him, and lectures her for following him when she eventually follows him anyway. Actively trying to jump and trying to catch Gwen whenever she's falling. And all this stuff. Like, he's actively trying to stop her from dying. And no matter what he does, eventually she dies anyway. And so that is a great idea of showing, because one thing that some movies show, but not a lot of superheroes, establish the fact that there are so many people in the world, it doesn't matter how hard you try, you can't save everyone. And I feel like that is a great way of Peter learning this, because one video was complaining that the ending didn't work because Peter never learns anything. But in reality, you don't always learn a lesson just because someone you care about dies, so that's one thing. And secondly, he does learn something for reasons I just explained. One character I don't like in this movie though is Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn. He's just not Harry in my opinion. He feels like he doesn't look the role, he doesn't feel like he acts the role, and I just don't buy him as Harry. I very much prefer James Franco from the Sam Raimi trilogy. However, I do think that his character is very, very compelling, and I felt very, very sorry for this guy. And I always saw where he's coming from, and why I think that he's probably the best villain in this whole series, actually, out of these Amazing Spider-Man films, is because he really isn't one. There's this special blood goblin disease that's been spreading, and it's very genetic. Like, his father has it, and now he's going to have it, and eventually he's going to die. However, he realizes that Spider-Man was bitten by a radioactive spider, and he became Spider-Man. And so, situations like that, it allows him to believe that if he has Spider-Man's blood, then he can use it to extract it, and eventually resustain his life and get rid of this thing that's happening to him. So naturally he asks for Spider-Man's blood, and Spider-Man just refuses. He says no. And so naturally he feels like that he hates Spider-Man, because Spider-Man has just said, "No, I'm not going to save you. You're going to die." That would explain perfectly why he hates Spider-Man so much. And then to add to that, he gets kicked out of Oscorp. One thing that always confused me though is that Harry Osborn owns Oscorp, so like, he's the boss of everything about it. How can you get kicked out of it? Although, admittedly, Norman got kicked out of Oscorp in the first movie, so, never mind. So, he's going to die, and there's nothing he can do about it, and he just got kicked out of Oscorp, and when he has absolutely nothing left, yeah, no wonder he does what he does in the movie. However, the instant he turns into the Goblin, he just feels like this one-dimensional Goblin who's just now evil, just because he's mad. And I lose all sympathy for him, but all the way up until he gets to the suit, everything he does, and I even end up siding with him, even though I know what he's doing is wrong. But I still side with him because he's such a compelling character. Speaking of villains, one thing that's really commonly complained is that it's a very similar complaint to Spider-Man 3, and that is the fact that this movie has too many villains. And I feel like that, yeah, it is true that this movie, it's hard to do 3 villains. However, I honestly think it was executed really well. And that's just simply because of the way the Rhino was executed. The main focus as far as villains go in this movie is Harry Osborn as a main character and Electro. Electro is the main villain. And Harry Osborn is given a lot of time and attention since he's going to be the main villain in The Amazing Spider-Man 3. At least he would have if it wasn't cancelled. But since Marc Webb probably knew that having 3 compelling, engaging characters was going to be way too much for the movie, what he did to Rhino was a very wise choice. He just made him a regular crook who is just being a crook just because he wants to, and he just wants to. And let's face it, a lot of criminals are honestly like that. They just like stealing from banks or something just because they want money. Just because. And Spider-Man just keeps on getting in the way. So their only real motivation is just to continue doing what they love to do without getting stopped by that pesky Spider-Man. And that is a great motivation that is simple and understandable and relatable. That is what they tried to achieve for the Rhino. The Rhino, he's just like a regular criminal, and yeah, he gets stopped by Spider-Man, which aggravates him, so when he's given the chance to be the Rhino, naturally he wants to go after Spider-Man just because he keeps on getting in the way. So he's just a nuisance to take down, and he's just a regular villain. Which is why I don't mind the fact that he only gets 2 minutes of screen time at the end of the movie. And the last few moments of the movie where Spider-Man is throwing the manhole cover around and the missiles are reflecting off it with the score and everything, and then that very last shot of the movie, a lot of people get really upset that that is the last shot of the film. However, I honestly don't mind because I feel like that it really ends the movie with a punch. It feels like that scene just punches you in the face going, yes, that was awesome. Would it have been cool to see the rest of the action? Yes, it would have been. However, we probably would have seen that go on further or another Rhino action scene if, once again, Amazing Spider-Man 3 wasn't cancelled. Also, since Harry Osborn was so uncompelling in the last 5 minutes of the movie, I feel like that maybe you should have saved him for being the Goblin for the third film as well. Just like he finds the suit and everything and then stop there, and then you can continue to make his character compelling for the third movie, as well as being a great villain. But apart from that, I thought Harry was a great villain. I thought Rhino was great, despite the minimal screen time. Honestly, the only real disappointing villain in this movie is Electro. Now, I am an Electro fan. I really love the idea of the villain. Like, I saw Electro from the Spectacular Spider-Man TV show, which was a great interpretation of the character, by the way. And how he looks, like how he doesn't wear those stupid starry masks, but his whole head is literally just frying electricity and everything. And he just has to wear the special protection mask so he doesn't go everywhere. So when I heard that Electro was going to be in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, that is what I was hoping was going to be in this movie. However, it's just this weird blue look, and I really had to get used to that. But what really disappointed me was that he felt very rushed as a character. He decides that he loves Spider-Man, becomes obsessed with him because he saved his life, and then suddenly in one scene in Town Square, he assumes that Peter set him up and everything, and like, you lied to me, just making an assumption, and just hating on Spider-Man just for making an assumption. Pretty weak. Yeah, I agree. Now, I know I may be saying this just because a lot of other people have been complaining about it, but I even noticed it during the cinema experience, and I spoke to it with my dad who saw it with me, and he said the same thing. Like I said, I thought that Electro was very rushed, and he said that he agreed. Also, the Green Goblin's appearance, like the face, it just looks disgusting. It looks gross, and it definitely does not look like the Green Goblin. It just... ugh. I will take the mask from the Sam Raimi film any day. But if there's one thing that I'm really going to be honest, I think the suit for Spider-Man in this movie is fantastic. This is, in my opinion, the best looking suit we've ever seen on screen. Now, people say, oh, the suit's ripping off the Raimi films just because it's Spider-Man. Really, think about it. Spider-Man's suit is just looking like how he looked in some of the comic books. He's just being the regular Spider-Man suit. And so just because they're sticking to the same suit automatically makes it a Raimi ripoff? Yeah, I don't think so. The suit just really fits the Spider-Man idea to me. I feel like that this is the best looking suit we've ever seen by far on the cinema. One thing that really bothers me about this movie though is the tone. And that's simply because this movie is a lot more bright and colourful. A lot of the movie takes place during the day. It's a lot more saturated, a lot more bright, a lot more colourful, a lot more fun. It's just a much jollier movie than the original. And one thing I'm just going to say that I love is the fact that we are finally getting a very, very upbeat, fun, delightful superhero movie. I've been complaining about this for ages. The movies like Avengers Age of Ultron or Winter Soldier, pretty much any MCU or DC Cinematic Universe movie are all really dark, gritty, and just very unpleasant, taking themselves way too seriously for their kind of premise. And even the original Amazing Spider-Man suffered for this. And yet, this movie changes that. It becomes a much more bright, much more upbeat, much jollier movie. And it's a much more fun and a much more entertaining movie than the other one. And so, I'm really glad to say that as far as recent years, this is the last fun, delightful superhero movie. And I really appreciate this movie for it. My only real problem though is that despite the fact I love the new tone, is the fact that since the original wasn't really that successful with its tone and everything, this movie is very, very different from the first movie. Like, with the tone, the look, and the feel and everything. If it wasn't for the actors and admitting what happened in the first movie, except for the actors though, I would think that this is a completely different movie. And the reason why is because the tone from the two are very, very different. And I watched the two Amazing Spider-Man films back to back. I watched Amazing Spider-Man 2 immediately after the Amazing Spider-Man 1. And the tone between the two are very different, and it feels like a 180-degree turn. And that's something you shouldn't do with a sequel. This movie's nothing like the first Amazing Spider-Man film, and I think that's just a problem with making this sequel. Either they should have gave the original Amazing Spider-Man film this kind of tone to begin with, or they continue the tone that the original Spider-Man film set up with. Now I want to get into the photography and the cinematography of the film. One thing that really got my nerves is the fact that the opening scene with the plane crash, I think had a lot of shaky cam, which I think is very annoying. I despise shaky cam in action movies. But apart from that one scene, the movie is visually stunning. The action in this movie is phenomenal. Like, I saw the trailers, and yeah, I agree that trailers spoiled way too much. However, one thing that really got me into wanting to see the movie in theaters was the fact that I saw that moment with Electro throwing the electricity at Spider-Man while swinging through the through the electricity place thing, and I saw that at the end of the trailers, and I went, "Oh my gosh, that looks awesome!" And seeing that in the trailers is really what got me interested in seeing the movie, and I instantly got excited for it. And the action is very fun, very entertaining. Way too much of it's in the trailer, but I thought it was fun, it was entertaining, and I love every single action scene in this movie. And what I also love are the incredible web swinging sequences, especially the first one. All of the other Spider-Man films just sort of feel like it's sort of like a medium shot, and you're just sort of getting the overview of Spider-Man that's swinging through the city. However, this movie is cranked up to 11. The camera is moving at a much higher speed. It doesn't become shaky like the opening scene. It's a lot faster, and it's getting a lot more angles, and it's a lot more close-ups and everything. Thanks to the amazing use of camera work, and since Spider-Man's completely CG, they can make him do all these amazing tricks and stunts and everything throughout the web swing sequence. And thanks to the amazing use of the CG and the amazing use of camera work, which really gives me this feeling of excitement and adrenaline, and it really makes me feel like I'm up in the air swinging around with him. And it's all thanks to the way the camera is used and the way Spider-Man swings through the city. It's amazing, no pun intended. The action scene between Spider-Man and Electro at the end of the movie also is very fun, very entertaining. When the action is happening in this movie, I'm having a lot of fun. And because the action was so great, so exhilarating, it's why I'm glad to say that out of all 5 Spider-Man movies, I think this one was the best cinema experience. I'm not saying that it's just exhilarating just because I saw it on a much larger screen, because I watched it again on DVD, and I still thought the action was very fun, very frantic, and very exhilarating, very fun. I love the action in this movie. There's even a scene during the Times Square action scene that literally had my jaw drop. It's a scene where Spider-Man goes in slow motion. Car is flying towards him. One of the web shooters has gone out. People are about to touch the rail, which is going to be completely electrocute them. And so with only one web shooter, he needs to know how to stop the car and stop the people from touching the rail. And the way the camera moves in this entire scene, it had my jaw dropping. This is a gorgeous looking movie. A lot of people complain about Hans Zimmer's score in this movie, but I personally think it was fine. People say, oh, you shouldn't have used dubstep for this movie. But personally, the only real time they use dubstep-like music is the scenes with Electro in it, which is very fitting for the kind of villain. And come on, I just think it's funny that Electro manages to use the whole pole thing to play Itsy Bitsy Spider. But the rest of Hans Zimmer's score in this movie is excellent. As well as the amazing use of camera work and how amazing, again, no pun intended, seriously, no pun intended, but the phenomenal use of swinging, that scene I just praised. But one thing that also complemented that fantastic scene was the amazing score by Hans Zimmer. The high-pitched trumpet noise, and it's very fun, it's very energetic. And it's by far the most memorable score I can think of out of all the Spider-Man films. I think Hans Zimmer has done the best version of the Spider-Man score. It's one of the few Spider-Man scores I've actively gone out and listened to in my own time because it's just so good. Another complaint about this movie is that a lot of people say that this movie is just a setup and it's not really caring about being a good movie. But in my honest opinion, yeah, there are setup aspects. However, I feel like this movie is a good standalone movie. The story arc with Electro was complete, and the fact that he died at the end of this movie meant that he was not going to be in the Sinister Six movie. Gwen's story was wrapped up because, well, she died as well. There was a great relationship between Peter and Harry that was started up in this movie and wasn't a setup because it was a great relationship. However, since he turns into the Goblin, the relationship would be completely different in the third movie. So that doesn't feel like a setup. The whole situation about Peter Parker and what happened to his parents, that's also really well concluded, and there's also a great conclusion with the story between Peter and Aunt May. There's a lot of things about this movie that are really well concluded and wrapped up. The Sinister Six aspect is really the only aspect I can think of that makes this movie a setup, but it doesn't feel like a setup movie. Everything else is concluded and wrapped up. Honestly, if you want to complain about setup superhero movies, you should complain about Avengers Age of Ultron, because I did not like Age of Ultron, and that movie was a setup. It's just a transition for the next superhero movies, and I did not like Age of Ultron at all. You may say Ultron was wrapped up at the end of Ultron, but he was only just there for the sake of having a villain for one movie. Everything else about it was setting up the next movies. I really don't get why people are calling this a setup movie, because I didn't feel like it was a setup at all when I saw this in theaters. Or even at all now. When I watch it now, I don't feel like it's a setup movie. I don't watch the movie and think, wow, that was empty and was a waste of time. I feel like that was a very entertaining movie. And since all these things are wrapped up and I really enjoy the characters in this movie, and I'm really warming up as Andrew, because as Peter Parker, he doesn't get bullied anymore. He's rather well respected and his relationships are continuing, and like dealing with his girlfriend, his Aunt May, and everyone is now well respected, even as Peter, which is why now in this movie I buy Andrew as Peter. This movie fixes the problem I had with the first movie, so I buy him as Peter in this movie, which is great. Great performance, and I feel like that the script is a lot better than what people are saying, because I felt like a lot of the characters were very engaging, and I really got engaged with the story. It did not feel like a setup at all. The action is phenomenal. It's a visually stunning movie with a fantastic score by Hans Zimmer. I really don't get why people hate this movie. I called Spider-Man 3 an underrated movie. However, when I watched it again to review it, I realized it had a lot more flaws than I realized. And there are a lot of things about Spider-Man 3 that annoys me. I don't hate Spider-Man 3 as much as everyone else does, but I still agree it has a lot of problems. This movie is underrated in my opinion because I personally love this movie. I had a blast watching it in theaters, and I had a blast watching it again when I watched it last night for the sake of this review. Do I think it's the best Spider-Man movie to date? At first I admitted that I don't think it was as good as the original Spider-Man 2, but since I have so much fun watching this movie, I think that it is on par with the original Spider-Man 2 by Sam Raimi. So at the moment, which one is the best? I'd say it's the tie between this movie and Sam Raimi's original Spider-Man 2. That's how much I enjoyed this movie. I loved this movie. So if you're someone who thinks that Amazing Spider-Man 2 doesn't deserve the hate it's getting, or you think it's underrated, then hopefully you'll like it a little bit more now. And if you hated this movie, well, tough luck, I guess. But I hope you get where I'm coming from, because I honestly really love this movie. So those are all my reviews for the Spider-Man movies. Hasta la vista, baby.